to the show and fall at your door. We got that info for you. Touchdown on that play and buy anything. More than just a podcast for you.
Next question. Let's talk about Black athletes and their lack of interest in baseball. Even though baseball contracts are guaranteed and they may have more longevity as far as playing time in careers than other sports, we don't see a lot of Black people playing baseball. Let's talk about it.
Well, I'm gonna jump in on that one real quick. Personally, I don't think, it's why they don't. I just think that's just how things have played out, because I know when my son was coming up, I put him in everything. T-ball, basketball, and to this day, he'll tell me, Daddy, why you didn't make me stay in baseball? Because Kevin can steal bases, and he can throw a ball. I said, well, you showed me more interest in football. You didn't give me enough to work with in baseball. You push back, you push back, you push back. So I leaned on where your heart was at. So what I think is a twofold situation. Football has become so hot, it's been the trend, people leaning on it. Basketball, they've changed the narrative about height and all this other kind of stuff. Size, hey, you're not going to be a point guard unless you're about 6'5". 6'2" is not going to get it. We know that's not true if you can play, and then for baseball, it's the same scenario. It's becoming to be, football is kind of like taking a charge and people leaning on it, because they feel like they have a chance to get in it. And people have downplayed basketball and baseball and track because of the numbers of the recruiting piece of it. They don't recruit a lot of kids. So it's like rolling the dice. So what do they lean at? They're leaning on their better chances to get into college, and it's football. That's simply what has happened.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, personally, I love when Micah played baseball. Played first base, third base, center field, home run king. And I used to tell him, he loved football, but I was like, man, the way it's going, if you play in high school, hey, you might get drafted right out of high school. Baseball still does that, and you still have an option, to do other things. But it comes down to excitement, where the fans is at. And football for him is like, I could play in front of 100,000. You could do that in baseball to an extent, but the excitement is not there. The money's there. The money's definitely there in baseball. And I was a little disappointed because in the area we live at, it was a nice high school team he could have played for. But he was just like, nah, just want to stick with football. So, again, it's just like Mr. Toliver said, football's where it's at. Then it's basketball. But I always made my kids play everything, too. And then you had to pick one. But you ain't have to stop. That's why when these coaches be like, oh, I need you to do this sport year round. Not in my household. We're going to switch it up. We can't put all our eggs in one basket. Just like he wrestled. Could have got a scholarship for wrestling. But, again, football was where he felt the money was at and what he wanted to do on the next level. So that's where he put his focus in at. So it comes down to the kid because, again, we can't make the kids do something they don't want to do, even though they're good at it. You got to let them have a little bit of decision on how they're growing up, too, as well. Because if you make them play it, they may not fully reach their potential because they're not playing for themselves. They're playing for you. So at this point, and that's where some parents go wrong at. Again, I never was that great, so I'm not living through my kids. That's what makes it better. When you had a parent that's been on that next level, sometimes it's hard because they expect you to be as good as that parent, but even though we got the same genes, we're two different people.
Right. I agree with both you gentlemen too, but I have to be honest, I don't follow baseball, but I do notice the lack of diversity at every level. And I don't know if that has a part to play because I've read where Russell Wilson mentioned that there were plenty of times when he played baseball that he felt alone and didn't have anyone he can relate to. So I don't know if that has something to do with it as well.
It does. It does, Ms. Johnson.
I'm going to dive in here and say, I noticed three things, and it's just me. Y'all know how I roll. Representation absolutely matters. There are lots of articles where kids say they didn't play baseball because they didn't see themselves. And even when you go out and look at the baseball conversation, In football and basketball, you could easily find a kid who doesn't know who Wilt Chamberlain is because they're focused on who's out right now. You can find a kid who doesn't know who Jim Brown is because they're focused on who's playing right now today. But when it comes to baseball, no disrespect at all, but we're still talking about Jackie Robinson. If you get lucky, you know somebody who knows who Mookie Betts is. But really, representation, kids do need to see themselves in a sport, see it's possible. And so representation does play into it, but primarily, in my opinion, it's two things. It's proximity and funds. When you look at what's cut, especially in inner cities, it's sports programs, it's after school programs, the things that you would do to go play baseball. Those are the things that are primarily cut when cities are in a crunch. Schools in inner cities, they cut sports, they cut music. So whereas you might have an opportunity at the after school program or at your school to play a sport, now those opportunities aren't there because there's no funding. But you go to the suburbs, and I live in the burbs, going out there to the suburbs. You're gonna have your nice fields, you're gonna have your nice parks, and having the ability to go somewhere and play, not having to pay on the concrete, having an actual dugout that you can sit in, having bleachers, like it really does matter in terms of who gets to play at a sport, because we want to play, but we want to be comfortable too. We want the opportunity. So I see that in a lot of inner city places where you would find Black and brown bodies, it's too expensive. It's too expensive and they're not there. And expensive is a big deal because even, I want to say it was Michigan's coach last year, the year before last, he made, even as they were doing their run in the College World Series, he talked about the fact that baseball is doing exactly what soccer did, which is pricing inner city families out of the game. It's super expensive to play club and they're playing all year round. And a lot of parents cannot afford playing all year round and the expense. A baseball bat is $300, $300 government dollars. That's a lot of money.
That makes sense.
But that's just what I found. Questions, comments before we move to the next question? All right, so moving right along. The percentage of full scholarships are so low in sports outside of football and basketball that an athlete has to have an athletic scholarship in addition to an academic scholarship and some other type of financial aid in order to come close to paying the full cost of tuition. What are your thoughts?
Well, I just think most institutions and organizations and programs, they're financially moving their money how they want to. That's changed. It used to be more equal than none, but now today they're putting their resources, their financial resources into what's driving their program. And we all know what that is, football. And we need to go get the best player to win, to compete. And that's just it in the bottom line. I could be missing something, but that's the top thing. That's what I've learned in my experience between my two sons when they were being recruited, the financial part of it. I saw it on paper. I mean, one I didn't have to pay a red cent. The other one I had to come up with a few nickels. But it's all about the institution and how they financial budget and how they move it. But I will tell you, football is kind of driving a lot of it.
Yeah, it's basically about the money. Especially depending on what school you go to, basketball, football, and even wrestling. They draw the large crowds, they're bringing the most money. So that's where they're going to keep their focus at. Now, tennis, track, field hockey, soccer, they're great sports. We're not going to judge, but they don't bring them crowds. They're not bringing in that type of money. So the scholarships are a little bit slim. So you need that academic piece. And for me, I tell my kids, hey, listen, it goes hand in hand. You get your academics, you get your athletics, you get you a full ride, so that plays a part. And that's where some kids miss the boat at because they got the athletic ability, but the academic part kind of messes them up. I had coaches come to the school. I'm like, man, I like this kid, but his grades, his grades. And it's like, the kids got to understand, the parents got to understand. Somebody has to help these kids out because these kids don't know, and you really got to be on them. Like I said before, I helped my son out a year because I ain't like his grades when he was younger, and that changed the narrative. He woke up because he really wanted to play, and I said, we're not going to play this year. So back to the question, it's about the money.
I agree with both you gentlemen. The only piece I would like to add is what you touched on, Terrence, was the academic piece of it, the grades. And my background is that I'm a high school college counselor. So Paris lived at home with his counselor. So I don't know if that was a good thing or a bad thing. But I drove home academics because I wanted him to know, regardless of the scholarship offers that he received, that he had the right to sit at that table. And Paris graduated with a 4.0. And so I wanted him to know, just because he had a scholarship, an athletic scholarship, that he had every right to sit at that table next to someone who was there for an academic scholarship, because he could have went to every institution that offered him a full academic ride. So I stressed that to him and wanted him to know that both are king in this house. Academics and football is king together in this house.
That's a great plan. Great plan.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Ms. Johnson, real quick, I hate to go off course because you're a counselor. Now, everything you know about sports and everything, were you taught that you had to learn that? Because in my experience around here, these counselors, they don't have a clue sometimes when they got these great athletes and they don't really steer them in the right direction. And that kind of hurts the kid. So how were you able to learn that background or get ready to help kids?
That's a great question. That's a really great question. I worked at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio as an academic advisor to various sports. And one of them was football. I had hockey, I had baseball, softball, synchronized swimmers. And so I learned then the importance of academics and working with athletes. And so I took my background with that. And once my family started having children, and then I started working in secondary schools, I took that knowledge with me and I used that to help Paris, and I used that to help other athletes to be able to be successful in high school, so that way they can transition to college smoothly. So that's where I learned that.
Yeah, you became a big voice for those families, which is good. We lean a lot more of that.
Yes.
So this is where I toot my own horn a little bit. I teach a class for my moms called It's Levels to This, and we covered this in my class. So I'm going to give you something that my moms normally have to pay for. In order for this to change, the NCAA has to change, because there are things called head count scholarships, and then there are equivalency scholarships. A head count scholarships means that this one person gets one full scholarship. Equivalency scholarships mean that the coaches get a pool of money and they get to divide that pool up among as many athletes as they can afford. And who decides which schools get head count scholarships versus equivalency scholarships? I should say which sports. It's the NCAA. So on the men's level, the NCAA has established 2 head count sports. That's football and basketball. Mm-hmm. If you're not one of those, you get equivalency. On the women's level, basketball, volleyball, tennis, and gymnastics are all head count programs. Every other program is an equivalency program. And so when you look at D2, when you look at JUCO, when you look at NIA and other areas, they follow the same model, and they typically offer equivalency because you get more bang for your buck. It's more advantageous for a school to offer. If you got a pool of 25 grand, you offer 5 players, 5,000, and then you say, okay, now we got to get you some scholarship and some financial aid money to cover the rest, versus head count sport has one player that gets the full $25,000. So
true.
This problem, if we're calling it a problem, it's really the way that the NCAA has said that scholarships can be offered. So that was we do this as a module. I have a class that I teach the moms called It's Levels to This, and we walk through the different levels and what that means. So I do agree that you don't have a lot. And like Kevin said, parents tend to follow the money when we're trying to get free college. So you lean towards the sport that offers the most money. But the reason that football can offer so much money is because they're set up. I mean, they generate the money, absolutely do generate the revenue. Can't deny that. And in addition to, even before they generated the revenue, they were considered a headcount sport where you could actually get a full scholarship. The coaches don't get to decide all the time in football. It's a headcount sport. So there's a little bit of a difference. So moving right along to the next question. This might generate a little bit of debate. In sports, what separates a good player from a great player?
Well, I'm going to go ahead and jump in because I already know y'all got great answers already. So I'm going to get a small answer out there real quick. To me, it's attitude. A good player, to me, normally plays for themselves or for people, where a great player will take on a lesser role to make the team better. If that sounds right to anybody. Like, good players, they just go out and play. They're focused on themselves, personal goals, where great players, they could go for theirs, but at the same time, they're helping everybody around them so there could be a team win, so everybody could be on the same page. That's my little answer right there. So I'll let y'all have the floor.
Johnson?
I echo that. And I also believe it's effort and discipline. Because you can have all the talent in the world, but if you're not disciplined and you don't have the effort and the tenacity to take it to the next level. So to me, that's what separates, and giving 110% at all times and never taking a rep off. And then you can't stay there. You know, Paris knows that if he makes, a bad play, he can't stay there. He has to let it go and move on to the next. So to me, that's what takes a great player.
Damn, I should have went before you, Miss Johnson. Well, I'm gonna put a different spin on it just to kind of mix it up a little bit. I always think big picture, and I think, Terrence and Jamesetta have heard me say this before. Everything that Miss Johnson said is true because I live and die by that in my family. My kids gonna have stamina, they're gonna have endurance, and they're gonna be well-rounded mentally when it comes to, just being in there. They're not going to get beat. They're not going to get outworked. That's it. I'm gonna put it in their head, and we're going to do it. But what I think separates it, you got to be consistent with all of that. It takes a lot to be great versus good. You got to be consistent. You got to have all of the tenacity and endurance and the stamina. You got to be mentally tough and strong, So I'm going to say it's the big picture. You got to have it all to be great. You can't just have bits and pieces of it. You got to have it all. And that's the only way I see it. That's the difference, I think, between great and good. You got to be balanced.
So I am going to say there's a couple of things that I think truly separate a good player from a great player. One is their relationship with change. The greatest players are willing to reinvent themselves, and they're willing to do whatever is necessary in order to propel the team forward. Of course, they have to have work ethic, definitely have to be consistent. They have to be mentally tough because it is hard to be the person that people say things about day in and day out. It's hard to live with them. It's hard to be willing to make mistakes and to actually make mistakes in public. I think John Maxwell calls it failing forward. It's very difficult to be the one that the game is on the line, you tied, you're down by one, you have the game-winning shot and you miss it, and then and everybody's pissed because you missed it, but you come back the next night and you're willing to take the game-winning shot again. But the biggest difference to me from great players is emotional intelligence. Like I'll look at Michael Jordan. If I don't know if y'all watched The Last Dance, I watched it. Y'all, so good. But he didn't truly become great until he became emotionally intelligent and he stepped up and said, as a team, we're going to get better. I think it's not that Phil Jackson didn't do it, because he did, but Michael really began to understand where the parts of his team should go. And as a leader, he began to challenge, like he talked about how he challenged Scottie Pippen to step up in certain areas because he knew what he was capable of. How it was okay for him, for Dennis went to Las Vegas in the middle of the season. And Mike was like, bet, he needs that, but we're gonna have to reel him in. So that emotional intelligence to understand who you are, how you move, and how the people around you move, and to begin to subtly, I won't say subtle because Mike wasn't subtle, but to put them in the position to succeed, to demand more from the team so that you succeed together, to still keep your own sweetness, because Mike was sweet day in and day out. But when he began to recognize that he had to make other people sweet and to figure out what motivated them to be their best selves on the court with him, that's to me the difference between good and great.